So let's paint a picture for a second. Imagine you've just closed this massive deal.
The one you've been working on for months.
Exactly. A huge piece of industrial machinery. We're talking high six figures, maybe even seven. It's this precision engineered unit, right? Coming all the way from a factory in Stuttgart, Germany, and it's headed for your facility in Ohio.
Right.
You signed the contract, the seller agreed to pay for shipping, and you are feeling great. You feel like you've won the negotiation.
And that is usually the moment right before everything goes terribly wrong.
Exactly. Because disaster strikes. Somewhere between a truck in Hamburg and a cargo plane, the machine gets dropped. Maybe a forklift tine goes right through the main control panel. It arrives at your facility, and it's effectively a pile of expensive scrap metal. So you call the seller, furious, and you say, hey, your shipment arrived broken. And they just calmly reply, no, that's your shipment. And good luck with the insurance claim.
That is the exact moment your stomach just drops through the floor.
And suddenly you're the one stuck with this massive bill, a broken machine, and a production line that's just at a standstill. The answer to who pays for this mess wasn't in the price tag. It was hidden in three little letters you probably just skimmed over in the contract.
Right. And that is precisely why we're talking about Incoterms today. I know it sounds so dry. International commercial terms.
Yeah.
But as that scenario shows, this isn't just logistics jargon. This is the actual language of risk and money in global trade.
We're diving into what's basically a cheat sheet for Incoterms 2020. And the mission here isn't just to, memorize acronyms like we're back in school. It's to decode this language so you can negotiate a contract without accidentally taking on $1 million of liability.
Precisely. If you don't speak this language, you are essentially gambling with every single shipment. You're just betting your company's money that nothing goes wrong, and you don't even know the odds.
So let's set the stage here. I think most people hear Incoterms and their eyes just glaze over. They think, oh, that's for the shipping department in the basement. But looking at this source material, this is actually fundamental legal strategy.
It is. It really is. These terms, they're published by the International Chamber of Commerce. They're the bridge between different legal systems. You have German law on one side, U.S. law on the other. Incoterms are kind of the Esperanto in the middle. They define three very specific things in a contract.
That's three things.
Just three. But they are the heavy hitters.
Yes.
So, first, costs. Who pays for transport, insurance, terminal fees? That's the wallet part.
Okay.
Second, risk. This is the big one. At what specific geographic point does the liability for the goods transfer from the seller to the buyer? And third, paperwork. Who handles customs, duties, and VAT?
Cost, risk, paperwork. Okay, that seems comprehensive. But the source makes a huge point right up front about what's not covered. And this feels like a trap people must fall into constantly.
Oh, it's a massive trap. People assume the Incoterm is the whole contract. But Incoterms are not a substitute for a sales contract. They do not cover the price of the goods.
So not the price tag.
Nope. They also don't cover payment terms, like when you actually have to wire the money, and they don't cover penalties for late delivery. So if the ship is late and it shuts down your factory, the Incoterm doesn't give you a remedy for that.
And there's one more exclusion that really surprised me. They don't cover the transfer of title, the actual ownership.
Correct. And this confuses everyone. Risk and title are two completely different things. On two different timelines, you can own something, but not be at risk for it yet. Or, and this is the dangerous one, you can carry the full risk for something you don't technically own yet.
That is a terrifying distinction.
Okay.
We definitely need to circle back to that at the end because the implications are wild. But first, I want to unpack what the source calls the big myth. It claims there's a misconception that happens in something like 90% of deals.
And in practice, that's not exaggerated.
That's
It's
fair.
pervasive. The myth is this assumption that expense equals risk.
Meaning, the logic is, if I pay for the shipping, I'm responsible. If the seller pays, they're responsible.
Exactly. It's the Amazon Prime mentality, You think, well, the seller paid FedEx, so if it breaks, it's their problem. In B2B trade, that is so often false. Expense and risk travel on completely different tracks.
So you can have a situation where the seller pays for everything, but the buyer is taking all the risk.
100%. The seller can pay every dime of the shipping cost, but the buyer is taking on 100% of the risk the moment the goods leave the factory.
Can you walk us through the classic example of this? Where do people usually get burned?
The classic gotcha is in what we call the C group of terms, specifically CIP carriage and insurance paid. Let's stick with our German example. The seller pays the freight invoice to get the goods all the way from Berlin to an airport in, say, Kazakhstan.
Okay, so the seller's writing the check to the airline. They're booking the flight.
Yes, but under CIP rules, the risk transfers to the buyer the moment the goods are handed to the first carrier in Berlin.
Whoa, hold on. The first carrier. So the seller pays for the flight to Kazakhstan, but if the truck driver drops the pallet 10 minutes after it leaves the factory in Berlin, before it even gets to the airport, that's the buyer's problem.
That is the buyer's loss. The buyer has to file the insurance claim, deal with all the adjusters, and wait for the payout, even though the seller paid for the transport ticket.
That is wildly counterintuitive. It's a total disconnect between the wallet and the worry.
That's a great way to put it. Just because the money left the seller's account doesn't mean the worry stays with them. This is why you cannot just guess at these acronyms.
So if we want to avoid these gotchas, the source suggests a magic formula for writing these into contracts. It seems simple, but apparently the specific wording is everything.
Oh, specificity is money. It really is. The formula is Incoterm exact place, Incoterms E 2020.
Why does the exact place matter so much? I mean, can I just write FCA Hamburg? Hamburg's the place.
You can, but you're just asking for a fight. Hamburg is a massive city. It has a port, an airport, 20 different rail terminals, hundreds of warehouses. If you just say FCA Hamburg, and the goods are sitting at a depot across town from where your truck driver is waving,
You get into an argument about who pays to move it.
immediately you get into an argument about shunting fees or terminal handling charges. It's the classic, I thought you were paying for that conversation.
Oh, I have had that conversation.
It's
It's not fun.
No, it's not. But if you write FCA Hamburg Warehouse B Loading Dock 4, there is zero ambiguity. You know exactly where that baton pass happens. You save yourself €1,000 in unexpected fees just by adding 5 words to the contract.
Specificity saves money. I love that. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty. The cheat sheet breaks these down into 4 groups: E, F, C, and D. Let's start with E. There's only one here. EXW or X works.
I like to call this the lazy seller option.
That seems a little harsh. Why lazy?
Because the seller does practically nothing. They just package the goods, put them at their back door, and say, come and get it. The buyer has to do everything else. Load the truck, handle export customs, arrange transport, import, all of it.
On paper, that sounds great for the seller. Minimal effort. But is it actually smart?
It's often a false economy. The source highlights a very specific trap here with export clearance. If you're a U.S. buyer purchasing X-Works from Germany, you are responsible for clearing German export customs.
Can I even do that? I'm not a German company.
Exactly. If you don't have a registered entity in the EU, you legally might not be able to file that export declaration, so your goods are physically ready, sitting there at the dock, but legally they are stuck.
And the seller's just standing there shrugging, saying, not my problem, you signed X-Works.
Right. And actually, it's risky for the seller, too. To charge 0% VAT on an export, the seller needs proof the goods left the country. If the buyer loses the paperwork, the German tax authority comes after the seller for those taxes. So it's a headache for everyone.
Okay, so if X-Works is the lazy option that backfires, what's the alternative? That leads us to the F group, right?
Right, the F group. And this contains what the source calls the universal choice, which is FCA-free carrier.
And why is FCA the darling of the group?
Because it fixes all the X-Works problems. Under FCA, the seller handles the export customs, which they are way better equipped to do since they're locals, and then they hand the goods over to the buyer's chosen carrier.
So it's perfect for a buyer who wants to control the main shipping leg, but doesn't want to get tangled up in foreign bureaucracy.
Precisely.
That sounds much more reasonable. But there's another F term that I see absolutely everywhere. FOB, free on board. The source seems to have a real beef with this one.
It's not so much a beef as it is a desperate warning, really. FOB is a dinosaur. In the context of 2026 and modern shipping, it's just so widely misused.
A dinosaur. But people use it for everything. FOB the factory, FOB the airport.
And every time they say that, a logistics lawyer sheds a tear. I mean, technically, FOB is only for sea or inland waterway transport. But the bigger issue, and this is a real deep dive detail, is the container rule.
Okay, explain this. Most stuff moves in containers on ships. Why can't I use FOB for a container?
Well, think about the physics of it. You don't drive a container onto the ship yourself and watch it get lashed down. You drop it off at a terminal stack, usually days before the ship even arrives.
It just sits in the yard.
And under FOB rules, the risk only transfers when the goods are physically on board the vessel. but you drop the container off on a Tuesday, the ship doesn't arrive until Friday. If a crane topples your container on Wednesday.
The risk hasn't transferred yet.
Exactly. The seller is still liable, but here's the problem. The seller is miles away. They've handed the goods to the terminal. They have no control over that stack. It creates this massive liability gap where the seller is responsible for goods they can no longer touch or protect.
That makes total sense.
Wow.
So the seller has delivered it practically, but not legally.
Correct. And that's why the source insists. If you ship containers, use FCA. Under FCA, the risk transfers as soon as you gate in at the terminal. That gap is closed.
That is a crucial, actionable tip. If it's in a big metal box, forget FOB. Use FCA.
Correct.
Let's move to the C group. You called this the danger zone earlier because of that split between cost and risk seller pays. Buyer takes the risk early. We touched on CIP, but let's look at the nuances. There are 4 of them: CPT, CIP, CFR, and CIF.
Right, it's a matrix.
Yeah.
CPT and CIP are for any mode of transport air, truck, train. CFR and CIF are C only.
And the difference between the I terms and the others is
The I stands for insurance. In CIP and CIF, the seller must buy insurance for the buyer. In CPT and CFR, there's no insurance requirement at all.
so if I buy CPT, the seller pays for the truck, but if it crashes, I have 0 coverage unless I bought my own policy.
Correct. And here's a nuance the source mentions that I love. The level of insurance required is significantly different between the 2 I terms.
How so?
Under CIP, the multimodal one, the seller is now required to buy Clause A insurance. That's all risk coverage. It's the gold standard.
Okay, that's good.
But under CIF, the sea freight one, the requirement is only Clause C. That is minimum cover. It basically only covers catastrophic loss, like the ship sinking or exploding. It doesn't cover some water damage, theft, or rough handling.
Wait, so if I'm buying delicate electronics via sea freight on CIF terms, and they get rattled and broken, but the ship itself doesn't sink,
You might find your claim is rejected. You're likely underinsured. If you use CIF, you need to explicitly negotiate for higher coverage in the contract, or just buy your own wraparound policy. Don't assume insurance included means fully covered.
that is a huge potential blind spot. Okay, so we've covered the lazy seller, the universal choice, and the danger zone. Now we arrive at the D group. D for delivery.
Essentially, these are the arrival terms. This is the only group where the seller actually takes responsibility for getting the goods all the way to the destination safe and sound. Risk stays with the seller until the very end.
This sounds like the premium service. I just sit back and wait for my stuff.
It is, but there are different flavors. Let's start with DAP, delivered at place. The seller trucks the goods right to your door.
Perfect.
Almost. Under DAP, the buyer is still responsible for 2 key things: unloading the truck and handling all the import customs and taxes.
Unloading makes sense. I probably don't want some random driver operating a forklift in my warehouse anyway.
Right. But what if you don't have a forklift? Or if we're talking about a 10-ton generator that requires a crane to get off the flatbed? You might want to look at DPU, delivered at place unloaded.
DPU.
It's the only Incoterm where the seller is responsible for the risk and the cost of unloading. If the seller has the specialized equipment and you don't, you use DPU. If the cable snaps while they're lowering it to the ground, it's still their problem.
That is a really specific use case,
Yeah.
but super valuable for heavy industry. Okay, now we have to talk about the big one. DDP, delivered duty paid.
The all-inclusive option.
It sounds like a dream for the buyer. Seller does everything: shipping, insurance, import duties, VAT, right to my door. So why does the source call this a fairy tale with a bad ending?
Because the logistics reality often crashes into the legal reality. To pay import duties and VAT in a country, you usually need to be a registered legal entity in that country.
Ah, I see where this is going.
If a U.S. seller agrees to BDP Paris, but they aren't registered for VAT in France, and they don't have an EORI number, the shipment will hit French customs and just brick. It stops.
Because there's no one who can legally sign for the tax payment.
Exactly. The customs officer looks at the paperwork, sees a foreign entity trying to pay duty without registration, and just rejects it. The goods get stuck, storage fees, what we call demurrage, start piling up, and everyone is pointing fingers.
So you should never use DDP unless the seller is a big multinational with a local branch office.
Or unless they use a specialized broker who can act as the importer of record. If the seller can't answer the simple question, who is the importer of record? Go away. Do not sign a DDP contract. You will never see your goods.
That is a massive buyer beware.
It's seller beware, too. If I'm the seller and I agree to DDP, I might get hit with a tax bill I can't claim back. I pay the VAT to get it into the country, but since I'm not registered there, I can't file for a refund. I just lost 20% of my margin.
Ouch. So DDP is risky for everyone, if not done perfectly.
Oh.
Okay, we've covered the theory. I want to look at the real-world cheat sheet section. Let's play out some scenarios to cement this.
Let's do it.
Okay, scenario 1. We're moving goods from a factory in Poland to a buyer in Ukraine by truck. What do we use?
The recommendation here is FCA, seller's warehouse.
Why FCA and not Ex-Works?
Because we're crossing a non-EU border. Export clearance from the EU is strict. The seller is in Poland. They know the local customs system. Let them handle the export paperwork. But the buyer in Ukraine probably has their own preferred trucking company that knows the border crossing, knows the war risk. So seller clears export, buyer controls the truck.
Okay, scenario 2. High-value electronics from Germany to Kazakhstan by air.
This is a classic CIP Almaty Airport scenario.
Why is that?
Well, booking air freight from the destination side can be a pain.
Okay.
You want the seller in Germany to book the flight. They have the volume discounts with the airlines. But because it's high value, you want the insurance that comes with CIP. The risk transfers early, yes. But the buyer is protected by that all-risk policy. The seller is forced to buy.
Got it. Scenario 3. EU to Switzerland. This one was marked crucial in the notes.
Yes. Switzerland is right there in the middle of Europe, but it's outside the customs union. The recommendation is DAP, Zurich.
And specifically not DDP.
Correct. Switzerland has very specific customs rules. It's much, much safer for the Swiss buyer who is already there and registered to handle their own import duties. So use DAP, seller drives it to the border and to the door, buyer handles the import paperwork. Let the locals handle the local bureaucracy.
Always a good rule of thumb.
Absolutely.
The source also mentioned some hidden costs that Incoterms don't cover. We mentioned demurrage briefly. Can you explain that one?
Demurrage is just a fancy word for storage fines. If your container sits at the port terminal longer than the free days you're allowed, usually about 3 to 5 days, the shipping line starts charging you rent. And it's not cheap. It can be hundreds of dollars a day.
And Incoterms don't say who pays that.
Not explicitly. If you use a C term or a D term and the buyer delays the customs clearance, causing the container to sit there, technically the buyer should pay. But if it's not in the contract, it turns into this massive fight while the meter is running.
So the lesson is, Incoterms get the cargo to the place, but they don't manage the clock once it's there.
Exactly. You need specific clauses in your sales contract for detention and demurrage liability.
This has been incredibly enlightening. It really is a language. Once you know the vocabulary FCA, CIP, DDP, you can actually see the whole matrix of risk and money.
And that is the entire point. Incoterms are about clarity. The wrong 3 letters can mean you're paying for a broken machine on a dock in a foreign country. The right letters mean everyone knows their job.
Whether you are the buyer or the seller, alignment on cost versus risk is really the only way you can sleep at night.
Absolutely.
Before we go, I want to leave our listeners with that one final, slightly provocative thought we teased earlier. We established that Incoterms cover cost, risk, and paperwork, but they don't cover ownership.
This is what I call the zombie cargo problem.
Explain that, because I feel like if I paid for it and I have the risk, I must own it.
Not necessarily. Imagine you buy goods, CIP, the ship sinks, the goods are lost. The risk was yours because it transferred way back at the first carrier. So you file the insurance claim, the insurance pays out. Great.
Seems settled.
But wait, who actually owns the insurance money? If the transfer of title, the legal ownership, wasn't clearly defined in the contract to happen before the loss, the seller might argue, well, legally, I still own the goods when they sank, so the insurance money is mine to replace my stock.
Meanwhile, you've already paid for the goods.
You've paid, you have no goods, and the seller has the insurance payout. You are now just an unsecured creditor trying to get your money back from a company in another country.
That is a complete nightmare.
It's a legal gray area that buys vacation homes for lawyers. So, the final takeaway is this. Don't just pick an Incoterm. Check your transfer of title clause too. They absolutely need to sync up.
Something to definitely check before your next deal. Thank you so much for breaking all this down for us. I feel like I can actually read a logistics contract now without panicking.
My pleasure. Just remember, specificity is your friend.
And thank you for listening. We will catch you on the next deep dive.